better appreciation potentially of Sam by the end of this meeting.
I miss him already. It looks like we are good to go. We are now live.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you, Hillary. Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. This afternoon we have a work session, which for us is kind of continue to wrap up some business that we need to take care of. As most of you are aware, the session for the legislature ended on Monday, but there are still some loose ends to tie up this afternoon, and we will continue to do so. Before we continue, just understand this will be more like a work session, so you'll be able to observe and listen to us throughout our discussions, but we're really not today. There will be no outside public guests coming in other than the folks that have been invited to attend from different agencies. So that said, my name is Joe Rafferty, and I am the state senator in District 34 down in York County. And the committee will introduce themselves. We'll start with our representative and co-chair, Representative Brennan.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Michael Brennan. I represent District 36, which is part of Portland.
Thank you, sir. And Senator Woodson.
Thank you. Dave Woodson, District 33, which covers Sanford, Massabesic, RSU 57, and Saugby Valley.
Thank you. Representative Crockett.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Ed Crockett, District 43, which is part of Portland and part of Falmouth.
Thank you. Representative Dodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Jan Dodge, House District 97, Belfast, Northport, and Waldo. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Representative Lyman.
Good afternoon, Sheila Lyman, District 74, J. Livermore Falls, and part of Livermore. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative McRae.
Yes, good afternoon, folks. I'm coming to you from Fort Fairfield up in District 148 in the central part of Aroostook County. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Representative Millett.
Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Millett. I represent House District 30, which is most of Cape Elizabeth.
Thank you. Representative Salisbury.
Hi there. I am Sue Salisbury, and I represent House District 35, which is part of Westbrook.
Thank you. Representative Stearns.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Stearns. I represent House District 119 in Piscataquis County.
Thank you. And we may have a couple of additional members enter as the meeting moves forward. When and if they do, we'll ask those folks to take a moment to introduce themselves. Okay, at this time.
Senator Rafferty, did Representative Hepler introduce herself?
I'm not seeing her on the screen. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
that's okay. I'm in the car in New York State somewhere. So my name is Allison Hepler. I represent the towns of Aroostook, Georgetown, Pittsburgh, Woolwich, Dresden, and part of Richmond. And I don't know how to put my face on the screen, so I'm hoping that's okay.
No, well, thank you, and my apologies, Representative.
Oh, that's okay. No worries.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Representative Stearns has a hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Roach did contact us and say that if he makes the meeting at all, he'll be late, and I forgot to mention that.
Thank you very much. And I do know that we have analysts with us this afternoon. We have an analyst working as both an analyst and a committee clerk today, Hillary Risler. Hillary is also accompanied by our additional clerk, and that's Sam Senfit. Thank you both for joining us this afternoon, and we will work from there. I think that there's going to be some folks in and out, but I'm going to turn the meeting over to Hillary just to give us an update as to our bills. I actually went through and I think I'm accurate. Hillary will, help me out there, but I think, if I remember right, I counted the department with 121 bills. Is that about right, Hillary?
That's about right.
All right.
So I know the end of session can in any year be a bit of a whirlwind and a lot happens all at once. I think this year in particular. And so Representative Brennan and Senator Rafferty as chair sort of asked me to put together some materials to help just sort of pull it all together. I'm going to be pretty brief. I don't want to bore you, and I know some of you probably haven't really had time to digest it all yet anyway, but I want to briefly just give you an overview of what I actually sent out to you. And then I'll also talk a little bit about specifically some of those bills that were on the special appropriations table, so you have a sense of where a lot of those landed. Very quickly, I'm going to start by just sharing my screen and show you the first spreadsheet that I sent you, just so that you know you have it. And for anyone who is watching via YouTube, we will get these documents posted on the committee webpage as well, so they will be available. But I first just tried to pull together a brief spreadsheet for you. This is all the bills that we had during the first special session, and I tried to keep it relatively quick so that you could use it as a document when someone calls and says, didn't I bill that did X, Y, and Z, what happened with that? This just provides the LD, the title, the sponsor, the committee vote, and the final disposition, or basically the disposition upon adjournment. So this does include, for example, bills that were carried over in committee, for example, LD 176, which was one of the bills that was carried over in committee. It also notes those bills that were carried over on the special appropriations table. As you may remember, any of the bills that were carried over, that were on the special appropriations table when you adjourned, were in fact carried over. So this hopefully will be helpful for that just quick scan of seeing everything that this committee did over the past few months. And if anyone over the summer has any questions about any of these bills, please don't hesitate to reach out to Sam and I. We are happy to get some information for you. I think I saw a hand.
Yes, Representative Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank Ms. Rosler for this resource. This is really tremendous, very helpful, and thanks so much.
Very welcome. I also sent you, I'm not going to pull them up, but I did just try to pull all of the relevant Education and Cultural Affairs Committee related pages for both LD 2021 or 221, which was the budget, as well as the ARPA bill and LD 1733. I don't have a summary for the ARPA just because it just happened. I'll probably put that together at some point over the summer and send out some additional resources on that. But if you're ever wondering what exactly the education related portions of those two bills were, to remind yourself of what happened, you have those as well. With the caveat, I do think I included in my email, they are long, so make sure you know they're long before you print them. But the one I wanted to sort of dig in a little bit deeper on was the second spreadsheet that I sent you. And this is a spreadsheet of all those bills that were on the special appropriations table. So you can see where a lot of those ended up. As you know, when you did your list of priorities for special appropriations table, not everything was on there quite yet. So this includes some of the bills that were not part of that priority memo. But if you're sort of wondering what happened with those, I did try to include them in this. Bills that had been on the appropriations table before June 30th, but were moved prior to the IFA actually running the table, are not included on this list. So if you're wondering why something's missing, that may be why. I just sort of had to pick a date and time to focus on to go through. And that seemed like the best date to pick. So this one goes into a little bit more detail about actually what happened with the bills. And so just briefly, it includes the final disposition, those that were finally passed, as well as their chapter number as well. So you can see, for example, I know LD 127 was a bill that was on a lot of the priority list, which is the pilot program for professional development in computer science, which was emergency finally passed. But I also tried to note on here some of those bills that were on the appropriations table. They actually still are on the appropriations table, but the substance of the bill was incorporated into either LD 221 or LD 1733, which was the ARPA bill. And so if you're thinking, especially in a year or two from now, if you're trying to remember why that bill that you thought was passed wasn't passed, it might be because it was passed in one of these other bills. And so for example, LD 144, which was Speaker Fecto's bond on CTE centers and regions with the capital improvements, or excuse me, the equipment purchases that would include capital improvements necessary for those equipment purchases. That was one of those bills that is still technically on the appropriations table, but the substance was included in LD 221. Similarly, as you know, on Monday, LD 293, which was the state share of the cost of health insurance for retired teachers, was included. I know that on the ARPA bill, LD 1733. Some of the bills that were priorities, for example, I know LD 761, which was the Maine Community College System Pell Grant Match Program, has been carried over on the appropriations table and is still there. And so, as I said, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I just wanted to give you a sense of where these are and what you can use as a resource. And certainly if there are any questions, I mean, there were a few bills that were amended off the table in certain ways. And so if you have any questions on any of those, don't hesitate to reach out. So that is the majority of sort of what I have for you. If the committee has questions, I'm happy to answer them now if I can. I also asked our wonderful fiscal analyst, Rachel Tremblay, to be here in case there are some more fiscally related questions. Of course, as I mentioned, you may have not had time to digest it all yet, and so please don't hesitate over the next couple of weeks as you go through these documents and get questions from others, either within or outside of the legislature, to use these resources and or reach out if you do have questions. The other big list that I am going to prepare is not ready for today, but I'm going to prepare and send out to you is going to be a list of all of the report backs from either the Department of Education or the higher education institutions that you can expect to come in next January, February, March, so that you have a good sense of what both in terms of what reports you can expect to get, but also most of those bills gave the committee authority to report out a bill. So it'll also have that sense of what topics and vehicles might be available on certain topics when you start thinking about what kind of bills you may need for the next session. So I'll be getting that out to you this summer. And I think other than that, that is everything that I really wanted to make sure I covered for you. The only final sort of bit of housekeeping is if you do have questions, Sam and I will be taking some vacation over the next couple months. So I just, if it's an emergency, feel free to call the office. Someone will be able to help you. But if you email both of us, there's a better chance of one or the other of us getting back as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Hillary. And do you have any, so if something's still on the appropriations table?
Yeah, there are a few things still on.
And at what point will those continue to be dealt with? Do you know that off the top of your head?
So it's ultimately up to AFA. It's their table, if you will. Obviously, you have some bills that are still on the table that were incorporated into other bills, and so most likely those are the ones that will die at the end of the second regular session. For bills that are still on the table, that there's still interest, just as you did this session, at the end of next session, the committee will have the opportunity to submit priorities, and those bills will still be on the table at that time.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Senator Rafferty, just more of I guess a point, but just for example, Representative Millett's bill about the national certified teacher, the salaries for that. That was included in the supplemental budget, but it's also carried over on the appropriations table because there's language about funding in the future. So I'm using that more as an example as opposed to asking a question if that's the case, but that's an example where something may have ended up in the budget, but there's still future action on the appropriations committee because of language and the impact in the future. Is that right?
Yes, yes. So that, for example, yeah. So those bills were carried over and they'll remain on the table if either they will be acted on next session or they will ultimately die at the end of next session.
Okay, thank you. And Hillary, I'm not looking for you to do more work, but if you were to do another draft of the priority, if you included the bill title, that would be helpful. You had the committee priorities, and they're just the LD numbers. And my recollection is not perfect for all 10 of the bills.
Oh, on the priorities memo.
Right.
Sure, we can keep that in mind for next year. Not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That hardly counts as extra work.
Right. Any other questions for Hillary or Sam? Yes, Representative Crockett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Hillary, just a clarification. Enacted and finally passed means the same thing, right?
Yes. Difference is public law is enacted. A resolve is finally passed.
Okay.
Oh,
That's that difference.
I didn't know that.
Anything else? All right, so we want to hand this over then to Amy and Janet for MEPRI updates. You good to?
We're good to go when you are.
All right, well, I'm going to introduce and then give her an opportunity to actually say hello, as I just saw Senator Daughtry join us. Good afternoon.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Senator Maddie Daughtry, and I apologize for being late. We had an emergency at work, but happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And even when you get back to work, now there's still emergencies, you know, it's tough. Thank you. Amy, if you would, please then. I don't know who would like to start, but.
I would be happy to kick it off. I'm Amy Johnson. I am co-director of the Maine Education Policy Research Institute at the University of Southern Maine. With us here today, I also have we also have Janet Fairman, who is my counterpart at the University of Maine, and Patricia Lech, who is our research associate and has worked really for both campuses a lot this year. I work with her quite closely, as you'll see with the reports we're presenting today, and is cited at the University of Maine. So for the plan today, what we have prepared for you is briefings of our Maine Care Billing study and our telehealth study, and also an overview of the topics that have been selected for inclusion in our work for next year, as well as some questions for you about next steps. We were intending to do the briefings first and then the work plan conversation, but it's really up to the co-chairs. If you'd like us to start with the work plan conversation, we're at your disposal.
I don't have a preference, so you go as you planned.
We will start the presentation then. Oops, wait a minute. If I hit present before I've done the screen share, I can't see anything. Okay. Is this showing up for you as a title slide, Maine Care Billing?
Yes, it is.
Wonderful. You're not looking at my background of my daughter's picture. That's great. Okay, so this is work that we undertook last year, really to try to get a better sense of what's happening in our K-12 schools with Maine Care Billing. This is work that is kind of pretty closely related to the other report we're going to be briefing today. So we're really happy to be doing those in tandem. I think it'll help make the conversation a little more efficient. And what we know from prior studies is for both the legislature as well as some of the work we do for the department to look at EPS components is that school districts have really uneven main care billing practices, and we wanted to understand why. And particularly to get a better understanding of what it might take to increase the amount of billing and really maximize those federal resources that are available to support our special education services. It's important to note that the scope of this, when it was proposed and executed, was really focusing on just our K-12 schools. And there's been a lot of conversations over the past year that have also expanded into what is billing looking like in our other services for birth to 3 and or birth to 2 and 3 to 5 year olds. That was not within the scope of this work that we undertook. But there are some learnings that are generalizable. So general background, and we know that you have learned an awful lot about main care billing and all your conversations on the PCG report and things like that over the past session. But certain IEP services are eligible for federal Medicaid funding. That's the crux of what we're talking about here. Not all things that would be in an IEP are eligible for main care funding, but some are. And then the services that are eligible actually vary a little bit from state to state. So the federal government sets kind of broad parameters of how main care works, but then each state develops their own plan and gets it approved with the federal powers that be. So things can look a little bit different from state to state, and what's eligible in Maine is not always eligible in other states and vice versa. So it has to be within those federal guidelines, but there can be some variation. The federal reimbursement rate for main care does vary from state to state based on per capita income. So Maine is a pretty high receiver, relatively speaking. We get somewhere, it's reestablished every year, and we get somewhere between 63% to 70% reimbursement from the federal government for those eligible services. And the balance, that 30 to 37% in Maine and how we operationalize it, is paid for by the local school district. So when they bill for main care service, they don't get all of that back. A chunk of it does come out of their state subsidy, and that's referred to as the main care seed. A lot of conversations about that. And the short answer, which you all know by now, is it's really complicated. And what we learned is that it was sometimes hard to really nail down the actual truth, because perceptions do vary among different stakeholders. And we would have two different people who are equally informed and experts for their slice of the Medicaid pie who tell us it works this way. And it may be true for 99% of what they do, but it may not be true for 100% of the circumstances. So there's a little bit, we learned a lot in this. And what we do know is that we tried not to put anything in our report that we weren't absolutely certain is accurate. But what we do know is that there are things you come up along the way where what one person thinks is gospel is not what the next person thinks. And that's, we tried to do our best to triangulate and come up with what represents actual practice as well as actual policy. So within IEP and IDEA, there's really two buckets of services, and they break down into related services, which tend to be the more medical and these are services that typically are eligible for main care billing, and that's things like speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. And then there's another category, another chapter of IDEA that's specialized education. And generally the types of services that are in that part of IDEA are not considered medical and are not considered main care eligible, although there are some little exceptions. And the two big things that fall under specialized education are special education and adaptive physical education, where adaptive physical education is can encompass a variety of things that might even expand into the regular classroom with educating things about physical activity, not necessarily what we might think of as traditional PE class. So the methods for this work was primarily survey work. We also started with some interviews to make sure we were in the ballpark and had the right questions and got some feedback on our survey instruments. But for this study of main care billing, the primary source of information was special education teachers and special education directors. We also got information from pediatric service providers, the related service providers, A lot of that survey focused on the other report, the telehealth report that we're going to be talking about, but because we were surveying these populations for telehealth, we threw a couple of main care billing questions on the provider survey, and then likewise the main care billing survey, which was a substantial focus of the special ed director survey. We also were able to include some telehealth survey questions. So there were these surveys that wound up informing multiple reports. And the surveys were conducted last fall and into the early winter. So in the surveys, we got pretty good response rates. We oversampled special education teachers who were in more rural areas because we knew to get a handle on main care billing, we needed to understand that the small district kind of experience, and got a strong response rate of 38%. When we got into special education directors, the response rate was even better. We got almost 50% responding to that survey. And part of that was really attributed to MADSEC, in addition to using the contact information that we have from the MDOE directories. MADSEC helped in disseminating the survey link. And so that bumped up our response rate a lot. So we thank Jill and her team for that support. And then again, there's a separate survey of providers. And what we learned along the way on that, and Tricia will talk a little bit more about this in the next briefing on telehealth, is that the contact information that we have on some of our service providers is a little uneven. And so we had good email contact information for a chunk of folks that were listed in the MDOE directory. So if they're employed directly by a school district, they were fairly well represented in the MDOE staff data listing. We had a chunk that had no email contact listed, and so we had to narrow down to the ones where we had contact info. But we also, there were a lot of places that we could see gaps, and we knew there were providers, but they weren't in the contact data. So we think this is an example where even though districts are technically supposed to report even contractors and consultants in their staff data reporting every fall, it's probably not happening to the full extent. And so we also sent emails out through professional organizations to try to get feedback from practitioners and service providers who may not be directly employed by school districts, but are working as contractors. And so again, in the end, got a pretty good response rate from those practitioners. But there's a concern that because we had good contact info for the folks that are directly employed by school districts, maybe less perfect contact info for the ones that may be contractors, some of this survey data may be overrepresenting that model of full-time employee working for a school district, which sort of leans towards our larger districts. And I cannot see people, and so I'm relying on the co-chairs to just flat out interrupt me if someone has a question. I probably won't see you, and I'll keep talking right over you. So please do interrupt if you need me to stop and take a question, because I'm only seeing a couple of faces at a time. So jumping into what we learned, and again, I think a lot of this won't be new to you. I think you heard some of these through your work with the PCG report and the I forget the name of that task force. I could recite it a couple months ago, but I no longer can. But what we know from the administrative data, and this is looking at the seed payment data, actual quantitative numbers, is that only 45% of our districts actually billed main care for any services that they provided in fiscal year 20. Now, there may be some relatively rare cases where the district actually didn't provide any eligible services, but that's pretty rare. Most districts have at least one student in their district who's receiving some of these services that are related services and should qualify. And that aligned with what we got from the survey of the special education directors who, and again, this was a confidential / anonymous survey, so we don't know who was who. But 38% of all of the special education directors said their district never bills main care. They just don't even touch it. And then in smaller districts, it goes even higher. For our smaller rural districts where that complexity is even more challenging, about well over half never bill main care. And only 30% always bill main care for every service. And then the remainder are somewhere in the middle where they might bill for some services some of the time, but they're neither always nor never. It advanced. Okay. And so this slide is really giving you a little bit more background and context, again, to place what I just said in context, that these are the kind of services that districts in our telehealth survey told us they are providing overall to one or more students in their district. So 80, 90, basically every district who responded said they've got at least one student who's receiving speech language therapy. Very high proportions also receiving occupational therapy, almost as high for physical therapy. And again, high percentages, and this is services within an IEP, are also receiving mental health services, clinical mental health services as part of their IEP, not part of social emotional learning or guidance programs, but actually within the IEP program. There are also behavioral health providers within IEPs, and to a lesser extent, adaptive physical education. We didn't ask the teachers, but we asked the directors, and then there's in descending frequency, interpreters, health aides, and nursing services that would also be an IEP. It's noteworthy that care coordination is very rarely in an IEP, although obviously care coordination is something that always kind of has to happen when you're helping and supporting students. So a little more side note about behavioral health providers. So we know that 97% of districts employ people to work with students that need intense behavioral support. Now, again, not for every kid with an IEP, but that they have this occurring somewhere in their district. But on that prior slide, only 43% of districts said that they have someone who's a behavioral health professional in an IEP. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect because only BHPs qualify for main care reimbursement. And so some of the services that we're providing are being provided not under the auspices of a BHP and therefore aren't reimbursable, or they might be provided, but not actually in the IEP. And if it's not in the IEP, it's not reimbursable. So there's some stuff happening in here with behavioral health, which, as you know, is a hot topic in schools. And so this is something that requires a little more investigation. So barriers to billing main care. And again, some of this will feel like common sense, but it was great to have this documented from our practitioners. And certainly what we know is that complexity is really a major barrier. It requires a fair amount of staff knowledge and expertise to even execute the billing for this. It also requires that you have the data. So you need to be of a sort of a certain size and a certain scale to have the information systems. If you only have a couple of kids with IEPs, you may not have sophisticated systems. And so pulling the data and even tracking some of this stuff is just not feasible. It's also times taking. And so what we heard foremost is that a lot of districts, the reason they weren't billing is because it just wasn't worth it. The amount of time that they have to invest to get the money back wasn't worth it. Partly because it's complex, but also because of the reimbursement rates not even really being high enough to cover their actual costs. So chasing that money to try to recoup a piece of it, and then realizing that you'd only get 70% after the seed payment, and then trying to balance that out with the time and effort that's required to pay someone to do the billing, it just is one of the big driving factors for why they're not doing billing. And then the other piece of it is fear of an audit. I think you all have heard the stories of what happened several years ago when they changed some of the bundling of services, and it really made dramatic impacts on how districts were eligible to bill main care, caused tons of confusion, and districts are sort of still a little bit reeling from that, I would say, even this much later. I do see a hand up. Do you want? I think I have to
yes, that, can't tell who it is. I think it's Senator Woodson, but I'm not positive. Senator Woodson, do you have a question?
I do. I'm sorry, I was on mute. Amy, it seems like a pretty large percentage of schools that just fear it's not worth their time or an audit. Are these schools more rural? Is there any pattern there?
Yeah, there is. So and I think there's a number in here. Don't get seasick as I scroll back. So overall, 38% of all the districts just don't even bill main care ever. And then that was significantly higher, 63% of our smaller districts. And this we defined as those with less than 100 students, so our really small districts. You know, basically 2/3 of them are just not even bothering. So yes, it just not so much breaks down on rural, not rural, but we did it by size. So because it's about that what is the human capital capacity in a small district with few employees to have the knowledge and expertise and information systems. So yes.
Okay, thank you. Have you folks looked at how that might be changed or corrected?
Well, so we'll get to the implications in a second, but there's some things that I think can help, and other things that that policy can help, and other things that they can't. So if you don't mind, I'll get back to that in my summary slides.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Yep. And actually, which are here we are at implications. Again, the main care building is a little more straightforward, I think, and intuitive. So in terms of the implications for what we found, one thing that we learned along the way, and that again, I think that you heard also from some of your other work this past session, is that Maine does not in our state plan have certain services as eligible that other states do have as eligible. So we are kind of leaving money on the table. And this particularly comes with mental health services and the function called coordination of services. So right now, the only folks that are really taking advantage of Maine Care for clinical services are those that are in day treatment. This, I'll mention, is one of those areas where wrapping our heads around it and saying exactly what is truth was we're trying to be a little vague with exactly what we're saying here. There's something going on with mental health services. There's something going on with coordination of services that really needs the folks that are closer to the work and more expert in the policy to say, what would need to happen if we wanted to expand our eligibility in our state plan and get federal approval to access more of those funds. And obviously the one that's really of critical policy importance is mental health services, because we just do know that is that's always a rising concern, and never more so than right now. So the other thing that we did mention is the reimbursement rates. Certainly, if some of the reimbursement rates were raised to the point where they were closer to actual costs, that would be an incentive that across the board, I think, might get more people to participate in Maine Care. Again, that trade-off of time and effort versus what are you getting? If the reimbursement rates were closer to, parity or what they need, that would be an incentive. Centralized billing is definitely one of the things that Senator Woodson, I think I would say in response, is something you can do. You guys talked about this a lot. If we had been giving this briefing back when you were working LD 135, we would have said, yes, centralized billing is definitely something that common sense tells us should make a difference, because it's that physical support and technical assistance for the districts that don't have the capacity to do it themselves, or don't have the knowledge or expertise and don't have the time to gain that. But it's important to know that this policy alone isn't going to, it helps with the lack of capacity. It doesn't help with the fear of the audit, and it doesn't help when the time and effort, the reimbursement rate just doesn't make it worth your while. And here's where I wanted to spend just a second talking a little bit more about this fear of audit and sort of what it brought up in some of these state-to-state differences. We do know that there are other states that structure these services a little bit differently. And so, for example, what Maine does is we have one set of regulations for Maine Care, and then there's some separate guidance to try to streamline and make it easier to pick out just the ones that relate to education. Obviously, all of Maine Care billing is huge. It's our entire medical services program in the state, and the piece that's relevant for schools and kids with IEPs is just a small piece of that. So what Maine does do is have a simplified manual. If I remember right, I think it's around 40 pages, and that's a piece of it. But what some other states do is they go a step farther, and they actually have education billing, education specific regulations that cut to the chase and simplify. And there was a stark example that I'm going to ask Tricia to talk about looking at how New Hampshire does this versus how Maine does it.
Yeah. New Hampshire addresses the audit fears by saying, this is a federal requirement, and puts up, the main thing is they want to see that the kid is in school on that day, that the services was ordered and delivered by a qualified provider on that day. Maine says the same thing, but they have an Excel spreadsheet that goes for 4 pages of a checklist, and it has all these disclaimers that you still need to fit in to this. So it strikes more fear of an audit into somebody than it does to alleviate the fear. most of the school services are the same. There's just going to be a few codes that they use, because you can think about, occupational therapy, working with handwriting, or speech therapy, working with the list, stuff like that. New Hampshire has, simplified school-based codes. I think everybody understands that you can have place-based codes. A service in the ER costs much more than it does in your private provider's office. So what they've done through their Medicaid is create a bunch of school-based codes for the routine services. The other services, such as like a splint or something, then they could refer back to the main Medicare manual.
So long story short, this really is the meat of LD 135, which you guys passed this session. So that does direct some more investigation into what centralized billing might look like. And the department is going to be reporting back to you on that. So here we are coming after the fact saying, good job. We recommend that you do this, and you already did it. So this does seem like, again, something that might be necessary, but perhaps not sufficient to solve all the problems, but a big barrier. And I see a couple of hands up, so I'll pause.
Yeah, Senator Woodson, do you have another question?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No.
So mine is, what you were talking about codes being used in the schools. In New Hampshire, are those statewide codes, or could potentially codes differ from school to school?
I'm going to take a stab. I'm afraid to go down too far into the weeds, because this really is something that requires more expertise than what we have at this point. What it is it's a statewide system. And so it shouldn't vary from school to school. I think I can confidently say that much, but I don't want to veer too much more down in the weeds. I think that the Department of Ed has much, much more expertise in this area.
Thank you. I'll leave it at that as well. Thanks.
Janet Fairman has her hand up. Can I call on my own trigger?
Yeah, just a quick related question that would respond off of what was just asked. So if a child receives these speech therapy remotely, not in the school, but at home over video conference, is there a whole other set of codes that schools have or providers have to use, or different reimbursement rates, or is it still under the same system?
Trish, I'll let you answer that one. Is that in your telehealth report? Go ahead.
I didn't address it in telehealth. Basically, when you go to the doctors, the services come up with these little codes and your insurance company pays them. And that for the service, you may have seen on your insurance billing things. That's what I'm saying as a code is. And then there are these things called modifiers, which is just another layer on it that they put on it. They can or choose to give more money or less money for something, just as I did on place. But this is something that's through the main care manual. In most states, there is a cooperation between the main care or the Medicaid office and the Department of Education. I know Maine has some too, but overall, there has been an effort to simplify the number of actual, how specific are we about what service was given to the child. In our report, I reference study where they looked at all the states, and they said that Maine had more of these codes where they asked the therapist to be more specific than the other state. I think Maine had 44 for occupational therapy and other states had 10. So that when you're going that specific, that requires a lot more documentation on the level of the therapist.
And there, I do know from our remote learning study, they all interconnect, that there are policy issues around billing by telehealth, and the federal government did clear a lot of those barriers when the pandemic hit to make it more billable for telehealth services. And I don't know the latest, but I think there is information about whether some of those changes were made permanent. I know a few months back when we were finalizing this, it seemed imminent, but I don't think it had happened yet at that point. So we're at the end. So those were here we are. So now we're at questions.
Senator Woodson has a question, I believe.
Yes, thank you. Amy, can you refresh my memory? Are these billings, is this the situation with DHHS, or is this separate?
Yes, so this is main care. I always get them backwards, and please just, I think everyone knows what I mean. Main care, which is Medicaid, is medical, and so it is through DHHS. And that was, I think, is one of the topics that's been bandied around a little bit, is what is the best place to have oversight. But what we do right now is DHHS is the source of handling the relationship within the federal government. There are specific staff in the Maine Department of Education that have expertise and are the coordinators to support the districts. So there's tight relationships, there's data sharing between DHHS and the MDOE, and MDOE does have some specific staff who, by the way, were helpful to us early on in this process in understanding some of the messiness. But in terms of the actual administration of the program and the links to the federal government, the MDOE is sort of secondary, and they work in between the districts and the DHHS.
Yeah, okay, thank you for refreshing my memory. I appreciate it.
Sure. So more work to come on this one, and that was one of our recommendations is further study, which is, again, you've already have that in the works. I don't, so sorry, I see another hand.
There's a question from Representative Brennan.
Thank you, Senator. And Amy, thank you very much for this report. That's been very helpful. I have 2 or 3 different questions. The first one, you said the FMAP reimbursement is 63% to 70%. The federal government had increased that to 90% for main care overall. But so did the reimbursement rate stay the same for these services, even though they're expanded overall for other healthcare services and Medicaid?
So I did not know that. So I don't know the answer, but I'm sure the department does. We based our analysis on the data that was available, which was back from fiscal year 19 probably, so it was all pre-pandemic.
Well, for the main Medicaid expansion, the main care expansion, the state's getting 90% reimbursement cost on that, rather than the 63-70% that we typically get for main care. So that's why I want to know if it had applied across the board, but you're saying you think it specifically just relates to the main care expansion.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And then my next question.
That's a bit of a guess. Thank you.
Okay. Do local school districts provide the Medicaid seed?
Yes. The way it works is it actually, the way they provide it is a little indirect or reverse maybe. That what happens is the Maine Department of Education handles that seed payment on their behalf by withholding it from their subsidy. So it is, the net effect is the district is paying it, but the mechanism for paying it is, it comes out of their subsidy, and the money, instead of giving the subsidy to the district and then having to pay it back, the department transfers that seed funding to DHHS.
Okay, because Representative Farnsworth had a bill in a year ago, 2 years ago, to clarify that seed process, seed match process. But you're basically saying let's just say the seed is $100. The local school district puts in $100. And then if they get the reimbursement at 63% or 70%, that's then subtracted from their subsidy?
So again, this is where I start to feel like, I might have had a better answer 3 months ago when I was a little closer to the work. What I believe happens is the district bills for the $100, that's the reimbursable amount.
Yeah.
And that the district will get that 63 or 70%, I think the most recent is 70. They never get back the seed, and then the department will actually withhold that seed amount from their subsidy.
Okay, but and obviously in those cases, the school districts don't apply for reimbursement. They pay 100% of the cost of whatever they're paying for.
Right. So they're leaving money on the table. Yeah.
But there's also a little bit of a disincentive, if not a penalty, for applying, because the department subtracts that from your subsidy. I mean, it would be an incentive for school districts to apply for the Medicaid if they were also able to keep the seed money.
I think I understand your question. Yeah, I guess to me, the way I make sense of this is the net benefit of billing Medicaid is really only 70% of even the reimbursable amount. So it's
Right.
it's sort of, again, every time you lower how much you're going to get from this, it affects the cost benefit analysis of how much work you put into it.
Right. But from what you're saying is that in some school districts, the administrative cost of applying is greater than the amount of reimbursement that they're going to get from Medicaid.
What I meant to say is that the reimbursement rate is lower than the actual cost of providing services. So for example, if they're providing a unit of OT and getting $100, it might actually cost them $120.
Right.
In terms of whether or not they choose to bill for that, it's further, the incentive goes down every time they have to figure out the trade-off.
Okay.
So yes, and there may be cases where the reimbursement rate is so much lower than the actual cost that it's like they would literally lose money because they might get $30 and spend $60 of staff time figuring it out. But I don't know that to be true from the survey. What I can say is they were very clear that the rates themselves don't cover the actual cost of services.
Okay. Okay. And lastly, this is splitting hairs just a little bit, but when you talk about behavioral health and then you talk about mental health, typically people talk about behavioral health, including mental health. When you split it up, having behavioral health and then mental health, does behavioral health then include substance use and other issues? Or are you looking at behavioral health broadly to include mental health, substance use, and other things?
That's such a interesting question, because we actually struggle with this. What we've learned along the way is depending on which field you're in, the word behavioral health means different things. And I think in the medical field, behavioral health is a broad umbrella that would include substance use disorders and all those things. When behavioral health is used in the school setting, and Tricia, you're going to have to see if I got this right because you're closer to this work. It's really more about those. It's more about kids with the diagnosis of emotional disturbance. Okay. And it's more about literally about behavior, student behavior, and less about the umbrella of behavioral health, which is just another layer of confusion on, what happens when we're looking at the medical world versus the education world. Tricia, did I get that right? More or less?
When we were breaking it down, I think the way it was interpreted is the mental health services were those from degreed providers, such as licensed social workers, counselors, psychologists, or certified behavioral health providers, which is different. Then you have these behavioral health providers who are not college educated, who are paraprofessionals. Mm-hmm. And they are the aides to the kids. They prompt them to pay attention, help with emotional regulation. So the behavioral health providers, as we're discussing, are a paraprofessional.
Okay. Now, the only reason I asked the question was to try to get a sense if there was a breakdown difference between mental health services and substance use services. And
I would say that, yes, there are. The other thing I would say that in this context, substance use services would not be in an IEP. They might be a service the school is providing. Right. And especially if the school has, for example, a school-based health center. So there's this whole other world where that, again, was outside the scope of this report, was other kinds of medical services that schools provide that are outside of the special ed world. Those were outside the scope of what we're doing, and those would be a different thing. So, when you go to the doctor's office and you're main care eligible, this whole main care seed is not an issue. It's a different model, and that substance use kind of services would fall under the medical umbrella, but not under IDEA. Okay,
but for those services outside the IEP, are those eligible for Medicaid reimbursement?
They are, and it's another layer of complication with the school's relationship to that. If it's not in an IEP, it's a medical model. I think for many districts, it would be a lot simpler and easier to let the provider take care of that billing. But if the provider takes care of that billing, if it's for any portion of it, and this actually happens, so you might have a kid who's getting 4 units of OT, but only 3 units of OT are in the IEP. The portion of it that is in the IEP is the portion for which the district pays the main care seed. If there's additional services that are provided and happen outside the scope of the IEP, and this does happen a fair amount, that kids need more than what's strictly educationally necessary, the rest of it could still be main care eligible, but it's not this, it's outside the purview of the school's main care billing system. It's so.
We also discussed in our report, you know, the mental health.
I won't belabor these things anymore. I think, you know, in summary, what you're basically saying is we have a lot of opportunities to access additional funds for a lot of things that we're very concerned about, but getting those funds is very complicated.
That's exactly right. And I would add on again, the limitation I got at the beginning. These policies are even different if we were to look at pre-K, which is a whole nother, there's additional sets of rules that apply in Maine for that.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
So the next report is we wanted to talk about telehealth. And Tricia, I think we are going to want to, those places we thought about maybe going faster, we're going to have to do that. So we're going to have to try to stick to the highlights. I will kick it off by just giving some of the background on this study. This topic was actually proposed before the pandemic because we knew that there was an increasing use of telehealth to try to mitigate the situation where we have shortage of service providers. And so this initially got proposed way back in January 2020 as like, hey, let's look into telehealth and see what's happening there. What can we understand about how adequate this is? Is this a good way to make sure kids have access to services? And, you know, where's the geographic pattern where we might need to focus more attention on this. And then of course, things changed and suddenly telehealth became a much bigger deal. And so that has, of course, impacted the shifted sort of how we focused our report and some of the data collection. And realizing that we are no longer necessarily talking about school-based telehealth services where the kid is in school and getting services from someone remote. We're now talking about students who are getting served at home, regardless of where that provider is sitting. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tricia.
Maine has been a leader in telehealth. I know earlier we mentioned about the telehealth parity laws, which require insurers to reimburse providers for services provided via telehealth that are equivalent to in-person services. Maine passed that law in 2009. So there was really no change in the pandemic. With our speech therapists, they've been very aggressive with adapting telehealth, and they provide training. Waldo County General Hospital has provided training to nationally and internationally to other practicing speech therapists. It's part of the speech therapy curriculum at University of Maine, and occupational therapy at University of Southern Maine is adding on telehealth training. We spoke with a startup company. They're developing software for video analysis and physical therapy. So there's been a lot of good things happening with telehealth in Maine. So our methods are the same. We did, get a lot of employed physical therapists, which may be due to the contact information or to them being more connected into professional organizations. We did not get any out-of-state therapists, though we know that some are practicing telehealth here, and 16 to 30% of the therapists in the licensing base have out-of-state. So we did not pick up any out-of-state therapists.
Did I skip a slide, Tricia?
Yeah, that's okay.
All right. I think I can't go backwards. There we go. Did you pretty much get this covered? I found it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this one's a reminder slide. And so what I wanted you to notice here was adaptive physical education. And what adaptive physical education is, it's required by IDA. If physical education is offered to students with disabilities should also be in physical education. OT and PT are not substitutes for it. Types of things that would be done in adaptive physical education are physical, such as coordination, but also behavioral, such as adaptations for students who can't tolerate high noise levels or variability. One example I was given was students who want to hit the ball over the net to students so they can get it versus the strategy of playing volleyball where you hit it so people can't get the ball. So we were kind of surprised because physical education is the subject where students are most likely to hurt themselves or others, that it was not in IEPs in 43% of the districts, where teachers said 47. So more than half the districts said this is not in our student IEPs. So we were a little surprised by that finding. And you can see that speech and language and occupational therapy and physical therapy are in most student IEPs, which is good agreement. We asked therapists about their own area. What's the supply of therapists? OTs, 55% said okay, about right. Equal number said too few and too many. And physical therapists and speech therapists, 71 and 79% felt there were too few in their own areas. Then we asked about rural Maine. As you can see, physical therapists and speech and language therapists said there are far fewer than needed. More than half said that. Occupational therapy, more than half said there are fewer than needed or there are far fewer. So therapists feel that there is a shortage of therapists in rural Maine. One of the questions said, in your district, what are the barriers to using telehealth? And one of the options was, we have an adequate number of therapists. It wasn't surprising that 5 of these directors were in York or Cumberland. It was a little bit surprising to us that 3 of these directors were in Aroostook and 5 were in Penobscot County. And most of the directors who felt they had adequate staffing were in small towns. There also was a difference in that only 10% of the therapists felt their districts had adequate staffing and did not need telehealth. So we asked, what happens if you don't have a therapist when there's a shortage? Does it not get included in the IEPs of some students who would likely benefit? 33% of the therapists agreed with this, but only 8% of the directors agreed. So there was a definite difference here. And then we said, well, does this provider supply impact the session length or frequencies of services included in the IEP? If there's a shortage, do students get fewer visits? 39% of the therapists agreed and 20% of the directors. So again, more than half didn't agree with the statement. So we're kind of left wondering, if you don't have therapists, what happens? They're saying it gets included in the student IEPs and the session length and frequency doesn't change. So we didn't come up with a clear answer what happens when you have a shortage of therapists.
Here, I just want to just add a little bit, because we did talk to some of these folks in interviews as well. And I would say that this is an interesting difference, that therapists feel differently than directors. The directors are, I mean, they're like rock solid. Like, we would never not put something in an IEP if the kid needs it, even if there's a shortage. It doesn't happen. And then the therapists, I mean, again, it was only a third of them that think this happens, but it's obviously much higher. So it's hard to know what's truth. Obviously, those 2 groups might have different opinions on whether therapies are needed. If you're a therapist, you may have a different opinion. But that was definitely that comes down to access, which is kind of the core question of this whole study. So that we felt was quite relevant.
This one I'll go quickly on. We asked, did your school have telehealth prior to the pandemic? We think there was some overstatement here because we know there wasn't physical therapy, but there was speech therapy with a high penetration in the western part of the state, as well as the central and northern part of the state. There was a little bit of occupational therapy, which is just starting up, but these are the areas where we know that telehealth speech therapy has been given. We asked a question about telehealth therapy. Is it equivalent to in-person therapy in some situations? And then we repeated it for in most situations. The vast majority of therapists and special education directors felt it was equivalent to in-person therapy in some situations. When we asked in most situations, the minority agreed with that. Less than 30% were agreeing that telehealth was equivalent in most situations. We asked why it was different, And we came up with what we kind of expected. We asked this question is, do you really need to take a hybrid approach? And most therapists felt they really needed a hybrid approach when they had to have some in-person contact. Most providers want at least twice a month. On the next slide, I'll show you that physical therapists wanted to see the patients, 60% wanted to see them every 2 weeks or every week. And 45% approximately of occupational therapists and speech and language therapists thought that the students should be seen every 2 weeks to 1 week. So what is needed to actually do school-based therapy via telehealth? They need the quiet space, stable internet computer connection. The adequate camera placement is really important for occupational and physical therapy. They need an adult helper, and the adult helper's role changes. In physical and occupational therapy, sometimes they're guiding the exercises or they're having to position the student to help with that. So it's a more active role than in speech therapy, where it's not just turning on the computer on and off. Scheduling becomes more important when you have a telehealth therapist. If they can't just go to the next room and pick up another child, they're scheduled in, they're blocked in for a certain child. Sometimes software is helpful. I mentioned a startup company. They're working with a 3D camera that helps physical therapists visualize motion in 3D. Speech therapists sometimes use special software when they're working via telehealth. And it's not the same as home. When they're doing it with different parents and stuff and different internet connections, there's been a lot more variability. So school-based telehealth doesn't have as many variables as what we just went through this past year. There are a lot of reimbursement issues. I'll skip through this because we'll talk about it at the end. And then we're trying to be quick. So our limitations is we really couldn't tell who was giving the therapist. We didn't have any out-of-state therapists. And then when we saw that low inclusion of adaptive physical education in student IEPs, we tried to look through the staff database and find out where the certified adaptive physical education educators are. And we couldn't find that through the staff database. They had ones that taught a specific class. They had 15 of those listed. They were primarily in 2 districts. So when we did this, we saw a difference, and we don't know if it's due to where our survey method, where we got a lot of employed school-based ones, school-based therapists. And we're not clear, at all clear what happens when the therapist time is limited. The implications, the therapists are very clear. There's an undersupply of therapists, especially in rural Maine. And there may be disparities in services provided. And we're concerned about adaptive physical education not being included in over half of district students' IEPs. As mentioned before, the directors were very adamant that if the student needs a service, it was included in the IEPs, yet this service wasn't. So we're not sure, what that indicates. And there's no statewide administrative data on what services, specific services are provided by whom. And that's kind of the crux of this, is we weren't sure where the therapists were located or what's being provided. And I think that's important from a normative standpoint. If your district is on the low compared to the state, you might reconsider, are there students that could benefit from therapy that aren't getting it? If you see your district is very high on therapy, you may question, are we prioritizing therapy over educational services? Our students only have so many hours in a day. So I think this type of data would be very useful to educators.
And this, we didn't actually, I don't think we said this in the report, but this is an implicit and I think potentially really revolutionary benefit of if we were to move to a centralized billing system. It gives us access to so much rich information about the services that are being provided district by district based on different students with disabilities. And it would allow us to really investigate some of what we think is anecdotally happening of disparity in services for kids with similar needs, having different services in different parts of the state. So that's maybe a side benefit for you guys, but for data geeks like me, that would be really incredibly powerful, I think, as a tool for understanding practice. Are there more? Okay, sorry.
So the vast majority of therapists and special ed directors felt telehealth therapy is equivalent to in-person therapy in some situations. As noted before, Maine will pay for it too as insurers. The reimbursement issues are complex because for a therapist, there are costs. Most physical therapists, speech therapists say there's far fewer therapists than needed in my area. So they don't have an incentive to go to a rural area. They feel to give optimum therapy via telehealth, they would need to travel to the area once every 2 weeks or once every week. They would have to pay for their mileage, the time away from their practice. If they consult with other therapists, that's not reimbursed. Software is not reimbursed if the therapist is doing that or the preparation time to do something equivalent. There are costs to the districts to doing telehealth. They'd have to fund the adult helper. As we noted in the main care report, that a helper, a behavioral health provider, somebody prompt them to do it, would have to be paid for. As in a lot of IEPs, health aides are in very few district IEPs. They'd have to pay for the video conferencing equipment, as well as if they decided to do the software, such as a 3D camera. So there are definite costs to doing telehealth to the district and to the therapist, even though it's seen as equivalent in some situations. Questions?
I think this is the beginning of a lot of understanding about telehealth. I see a question from Representative Dodge.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about the certification data on phys ed teachers and their utilization by administrators to perhaps teach a class in adaptive PE. Do you have information on that small strand, please?
Okay, so I can double check this, but what I'm confident enough to say, there is a different credential for adaptive physical education. What we were referencing in the report is that when we're getting contact information to be able to do a sample, the Maine Department of Education listing of teachers just says teacher. So we couldn't isolate from that and pick out just the adaptive physical education teachers, except for a small handful that had a staff category that nobody else seemed to be using. So most PE teachers are coded as classroom teacher. It's a broad umbrella category, and that's why we weren't able to get our hands around them. But there are, I'll double check, but I'm reasonably sure there is a specific credential.
There is a specific credential that requires some extra courses on top of physical education. And
I do suspect there's a shortage of folks with that credential.
Yeah, and there is a professional organization, but they're not all encompassing, so they don't have the full roster of it either. They said that there is some discussion about the credential between the professional organization and Maine Department of Education.
Is that Mayford?
I'm not sure.
I don't think we know, but I don't think we were down that closely to the issue.
No, we just were surprised to see that it wasn't in IEPs.
Thank you.
And we spoke with some adaptive physical educators.
So if there are no other questions, we'll breeze through to the discussion of the work plan. Are we ready for that, Representative Brennan, Senator Rafferty? My slides just are advancing in a weird way. Okay, so it's been an unusual year is the beginning of our discussion about the fiscal year 2022 work plan. And we're hoping that we might learn from some of what worked and what didn't this unusual year to inform maybe some improvements and how we figure out the work plans moving forward. So what we have typically had under this contract is what I'm going to call a reactive approach to scheduling these reports. Obviously, delivering these reports when you've just adjourned your session in July is not the real design. It's not the model we're aiming for with this work that we do for you. But in a typical approach, the way we do this is we would have already met with you guys a couple of times as a committee to really talk through these proposed topics, get a sense of what you want us to study, and then we go away and we just do it. We design the study methods that we infer are going to get at what you guys are interested in. And then based on what the study methods are that we, obviously if we wanted some certain questions, if we wanted to look at one thing, we might look at administrative data. Other things, we might do a survey. Other things, we might want to do case studies. Well, we let the study methods then dictate, this is when this report could be available. So if it's a case study, those take months of lead time. So those are going to have to be end of session. If there's something else, well, if that's not happening till December, then we would target that for a March date. But we target those based on the logistics of our process rather than when do you need this report. So what we are proposing that we do differently next year, since we're at this circumstance where we have not yet really had a robust conversation about the specific goals you want us to study. We have our topics identified, but we'd like to have another pass to get input from both you all as well as the MEPRI through the vehicle of the MEPRI steering committee to put together a more concrete plan of this is what we're going to do this year. And then we can talk with the co-chairs about when might these studies be the most useful to you. And if there's a study that you say, this report is no good to me in June, I need it by January, we might then, oh, sorry, I forgot to say, we might then come back and say, okay, well, we can't do what we had initially thought by January, but we could do this instead. So we're envisioning a more hands-on process of helping us figure out the specifics of the research methods in a really short time frame in the next month so that we can go out and try to do, I'm going to say, a better job of having these reports come at a time when they're helpful to you. That's really our ultimate goal in this work, is to have our work be useful to the policymakers. So what we're proposing as a process is that we're about to go through the topics that made it through the work plan. We'll just give you brief introductions. And what we'd like you to do is think about we're not going to have a long discussion. We don't have time for that today, but give that input to Representative McRae, who is your representative on the MEPRI steering committee. We'll also be going back to the department and as well as the MEPRI steering committee, because some of this work is so integrated with some of their professionals. And then we'll come back with our final, here's what we propose, and then we'll work with the co-chairs to finesse those dates and make sure we can do everything within the resources that we have. So I'm looking for a nod of approval that we don't really have a lot of other options for doing these things. But as of today, we're not yet under contract. It's always a bit of an issue. We're really close, so I think we might even, we might have a signature by the end of the week, but this is what we've come up with as a good way to make sure we can get a plan that works moving forward. And we actually think that there might be some improvements in doing it this way. Do we have some, so again, that for our concrete process we're proposing, we'll go through these now, and that you would provide questions or suggestions to Representative McRae by August 1st. So we're looking for some quick turnaround so that we can bring that to the MEPRI steering committee, and then come back and meet with the co-chairs to say, this is our plan, are we all on the same page? This is going to be a little bit of a trial and error, especially with making sure that we come up with a research plan that's feasible. Do we have thoughts about whether this feels like a reasonable and productive process?
Representative Brennan has his hand up. I don't know if you can see him.
I can see it. Am I allowed to call on him? I don't know that I am.
Well, I'm sorry. I've been trying to talk. I didn't realize I was muted. I'm sorry.
I can call on myself, I guess.
Yes, you can.
Can we take the shared screen down so we can
Oh,
see?
yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'll put it back up when we get to the topics.
And Amy, first, I just say thank you very much for both reports. I thought they were very informative, very helpful. But I also think that both those reports represent kind of your analysis about how we might want to think about aligning the report with the work of the committee. because clearly we had a lot of discussion this past session about CDS, main care reimbursement, shortage of therapists, unified billing systems, and some of this information, while it's not directly related to CDS, it certainly touched upon that, and it highlights many of the issues that we identified as problematic within the CDS system were represented in both these reports. Again, in terms of availability of therapists, main care reimbursement. So if we can get a better alignment to have those type of reports at the time we're having discussions about what to do with legislation or issues, that's very helpful. Your report was also very helpful on the regional adjustment issue that we had about whether or not to adjust factors and the regional adjustment. Very, again, complicated, but I think it's going to be helpful as we discuss this fall and next session what to do with the regional adjustments. So if working with you, the rest of the committee, and Representative McCray to figure out a way, and I agree, and I'll blame Senator Rafferty for this, not myself, that clearly as co-chairs, we didn't do as good a job as we could have in helping to align your reports and what you want to do get before the committee. And I think both of us would be committed from today to try to do a better job at that. If we can, it will certainly enhance the work, your work, and the work of the committee.
I feel like we've learned a lot over the last few years, and this one more than ever. And I do feel like maybe this is a way to learn a better way of doing things. Normally we would have been in front of you guys in January, and we didn't get there till April. I mean, you guys, as you lived it, you didn't have a lot of time for us. And that hopefully will be a little bit more normalized next year as well.
Well, it wasn't because of a lack of caring.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
I have some questions. I think Representative Millette, followed by Senator Woodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Be that it may that we're getting these reports later legislatively, I think for sure the main care billing can inform the work of the bill that we just enacted. And I can't remember if in that resolve we mentioned requiring, making sure that your MEPRI's work was included in the analysis for the report back to the committee. So I just would ask Ms. Risler, and I can see she's already checking.
I actually, the next thing we want to do once we've gone through these questions is we'll actually go through at a high level, again, not for discussion, but just to prime you the topics. And I will talk a little bit about the messiness on what's in our legislative work plan versus what's in our perhaps work we might do for the department. So I'll address that directly.
So, but meanwhile, just to finish my thought,
sure.
If we could make sure, Ms. Risler, that well, I guess I would, since it appears that you brought up the document, do we mention utilizing the work of MEPRI? And if we don't, if we could please have, if other committee members are in support, a memo from us drawing their attention to it and making sure that that work is incorporated and informs the report that we receive as a committee. Thank you.
If I may answer that, Senator Rafferty and Representative Brennan. So I did just pull that up, and the committee did include that. I think at the time the committee drafted it, that report was not final. I think, if I recall correctly, Amy and Janet, you would come in and done an executive summary for the committee. And so what we did include is that the report has to include, and the study has to include, examples of other states with centralized billing systems, including but not limited to New Hampshire and New York, and using data and information provided by a statewide education policy research institute, which is the term we use for MEPRI. So it is in there. The committee could certainly write a memo, but I'm also happy to just send an email along to the department mentioning that it came up today and to make sure and I'm happy to do that. I don't think I need a formal memo unless the committee would like one.
And I would say
We're able to do.
the department is already, we've had some informal conversations already. They're aware of this.
Senator, thank you, Hillary. Senator Woodson, please.
Thank you, sir. It certainly has been a unique year, and I appreciate all the work that everybody's done, and especially MEPRI. The going forward, it says that the co-chairs will have the final say, and I would appreciate if the co-chairs would include feedback from the leads, which is Representative Stearns and myself, as we go forward.
Thank you for that, and I'm certain to, and hopefully we hear from all committee members before we make any final decisions or anything moving forward. But definitely, thank you for that, Senator.
Thank you,
Representative Millette. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. So,
are we ready to go back to the topic list?
We are, and Amy, but also are you planning on sharing this, today's presentation with us as well? I know I've been trying to take notes, but it's
absolutely, yes.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I can turn it into a PDF, so should be accessible for everybody. So again, what we're proposing is that right now we just want to alert you to the topic so you can be mulling over which one of these do I care about, I'll be honest, and then give your thoughts to Representative McRae or whatever process you guys would like, really, but that we are envisioning. We want to have the MEPRI steering committee really have a broad brush of helping us shape up this work plan based on what we think is best for practitioners and policymakers, and then ultimately it'll be the co-chairs who make the final decision on this is what we're going to do. And so Janet will give you the overview of the 3 topics that she'll be leading this coming year.
Sure. So based on your feedback and the steering committee's interest and suggestions, everyone really wanted to look a little bit more deeply at the kinds of innovative practices that emerged during COVID. We saw a lot, schools, teachers had to pivot. They had to deliver instruction in different ways, whether remotely, hybrid, or in the schools. And so we'd like to learn to find out what new strategies and innovative practices emerged that educators in schools are thinking are really valuable for students and that they might want to continue post-COVID. And so that's one topic, and it's very broad, and it could encompass any content area, any grade level. So we need your help to kind of figure out what the focus will be, because of course we can't do everything. The second topic is related, and that is, what kinds of innovative strategies did schools use to support teachers as teachers had to suddenly learn how to use Google Classroom, other software, and to video conference with students and to support students in remote instruction. And we learned from some of the MEPRI reports on telehealth that providers and special educators felt that some of the students actually benefited more in some ways. The students did better with remote instruction. They had less distraction, and they actually progressed more than teachers had expected them to. So educators in schools are beginning to kind of examine the whole experience of how they supported students and supported teachers in learning what they had to learn to deliver instruction differently, and thinking about what might be valuable to keep and continue. So again, that's a broad topic, and we need your help and your ideas, your input on what the focus might be. And lastly, we'd like to do a survey. It hasn't been done, I think, for over 10 years. The University of Maine used to do periodic surveys of Maine school principals, statewide survey. And it's really time to check in with them again at least principals and perhaps other administrators, we've talked about how are they faring post-COVID in this next year. If we were to ask them, do they intend to stay in their career path? What kinds of supports do they feel they're getting or need to stay in their careers? We know there's concern about high turnover, particularly for principals, but also for other administrators. And it's a concern, how do we keep them? How do we support them? Also, many principals now are younger and are less experienced. So that has some implications for what we might need to do to support them as a state. So those are 3 topics that my campus is going to take a lead on. And if you have ideas, please share them with David McRae by email or with your co-chairs. Thank you.
And I see Senator or Representative Millett has her hand up. I just want to reiterate what we're looking for here is these are my burning questions related to these topics. And also here's one, it would be really helpful to have the answer.
Representative Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, with that last bullet point, it would be great if we could include in that analysis barriers for teachers to pursue administrative positions. My impression is that very few classroom teachers choose to go into these roles. And one would think that this is a natural, organic source that we should be really investing in and encouraging. But I think for a long time that's been something that's languished, and I'd love us to have a better understanding of what's going on.
So that's a great example of that would be a rich conversation within the MEPRI steering committee. The implications of that would be, we'd want to talk to teachers, which has a big methodological implication. And so we'd have to put that in the hopper, look at the resources, figure out what it might look like. So this would be, I'm excited by this process, but it's going to be, I'm just naming and explicitly naming how I'm observing. I love that. And also that would be a different level of resources than what we had initially proposed with a survey of administrators. So, but
we could also ask principals from their perspective. Principals support teacher leaders in their schools, and it might be done within a principal survey. But that's a great suggestion. Teachers are the pipeline, right, for the future principal role.
The other thing that might come out of this process is questions that come up that we realize we may not be able to exactly answer it, but we might have some prior studies. And I do know we have some that aren't exactly what Representative Millett talked about, but might help a little bit, where we looked at some of those pathways. So this may be a rich process where we actually are able to do a little more than we might have hoped by finding some of the low hanging. For example, maybe I can find a graduate assistant who would like to do that, even if I can't fit it in the MEPRI work plan, things like that. So this, I'm getting more and more excited about this process, although also nervous about these next steps ahead of us.
We have Representative Brennan has a question as well.
Thank you, Senator. I just wanted to ask Janet, Amy, when you say about innovative strategies that schools use to address student learning and needs, programs, resource support, does that also include mental health?
Yes.
It can, yes. And there's another topic you'll see on the next page where we want to talk about that as well.
Because
so
again,
the topic is so wide. That's we really need, and we don't have money and time to do all of it. So we need to see where you think the priorities should be.
Okay. Great, because as a committee, we spent a lot of time talking about the importance of mental health and what COVID-19 has done to students in terms of increased mental health issues. So I think it'd be great looking at student learning innovations, but at the same time, what strategies have we used around mental health issues that have been effective, or what are some of the gaps in services?
I certainly expect that might be the kind of thing that comes up. These two topics are a little bit, are kind of tricky to answer that question of what's the policy relevance, because really what this is about is let's catch that flash in the pan. What is it that we need to study right now while it's fresh? We don't yet really know exactly what we're going to find, but I do imagine that social emotional learning, things like that, the state has had some great initiatives that I imagine might come up in that.
And I'll just say lastly, really quick, before Amy talks about her projects, we're thinking that for these first two innovative strategies topics, we might plumb the data already collected by the Maine Department of Education from school districts that put forward plans or proposals for how they would use stimulus money to address identified needs in their school districts across the state, which is going to vary from school to school. So there were many different stimulus funding periods that happened, opportunities, but districts have put forward plans that identified what their needs are. And we think that that is a really good, rich source of data and information that we could glean from districts initially. First of all, what are their needs? And secondly, what are the innovative strategies and plans that they have in place to address those needs?
And that's a great segue to the third bullet on the slide of the USM-led topics. So this is exactly what we're planning to do. So with the innovative practices, there were two different things that came up in the brainstorm process. One was, what might we learn from the applications for federal funding about how districts are spending that money and what are they doing? That may or may not elicit innovative practices and strategies. We don't know. So we imagine that might be one source, and we might be able to look in that to get some information, but that we may also need to go outside that as a data source to identify practices to study that we think are innovative and worth shining a light on. Because we do specifically want to have an understanding of how schools might be leveraging federal funds, we have this specific topic of, we know from the department and working closely with, particularly with J.C. Holmes and also Chelsea Fortin, that we don't have to go through all this and do it ourselves. The department in the conversation said we can actually help with culling through this list and using some of their free technical assistance and give you a query, and they'll give us some support in coming up with a list that we can then look at to characterize how districts are using their federal funds. So this isn't necessarily a big, broad case study of everything, but we might try to get a deeper handle on how schools are leveraging those funds. And then to the extent that some of those might look really innovative, we might kick it over to Janet to also shine a light on that for the innovative practices, if that makes sense. Representative Millett, I don't know if your hand is up newly or if that's up from before.
It is. I apologize if this was discussed earlier about process. But so these topics result from the poll that was done with the committee and went back to the MEPRI board. So I think in the past, you folks have come back to the committee with a chart of the topics and how much effort is required, how much time is required, and then kind of asked us to try to prioritize the short term and the long term. Are we going to get something like that? Because that visually, that helps me kind of wrap my head around how to communicate my personal preferences that I would report back to Representative McRae.
So the long story short, and the candid answer is, we didn't get that step in the process this year because this is the first time we've been able to talk to you guys since April. And we had to get a contract underway. So what we worked with the co-chairs there was a pretty clean cut with the priorities. There wasn't a lot of black and white in negotiation about where to make that cutoff. It was sort of pretty clear. This is where there was a jump. So these are the topics, and then the question. Although we would certainly be more than happy to give you the entire ranked list so you can see that data for yourself. But there was not an opportunity to come back at that point to discuss it and get that input, and that's why we're proposing this pretty different process this year. Instead of getting the upfront process, since we've already identified the topics, it gives us the opportunity to instead really hone in on the methods and the specific questions, which normally is something that you don't get a chance to weigh in on because you put more energy up front. It's like I say, it's been an interesting year.
Okay, so I guess I'm not clear. What is it that you are hoping we will communicate to Representative McRae?
Within these topics that have made it into the work plan, a little bit more below the surface, what's a specific question or a research question or a guiding, like, I'm really hoping that you would come back with information about this to help me understand better. So at the global level, we certainly can and will develop a research study that we think will address these questions. But if there are more specific nuances you want to make sure that we get out of this study, we're really hoping that you would put that on the table and be part of that conversation, so that we don't come back in 6 months and you're like, oh, too bad, I wish they would have asked this question.
In terms of the size, we can say of these 6 projects, 2 of them we thought could be done for less time and effort or money in the contract. So the third one that I talked about was the principal or administrator survey. Would be, less time and effort, a smaller project, if you will. And then the third one on Amy's list here, which she'll talk about, was also considered a smaller project. The other 4 are pretty good size in terms of the amount of staffing time and data collected. But we have all that broken down in our contract on the work plan as well.
So this is where, and again, I talked a little bit about that process where the MDOE is going to work with us to call through the federal data, federal applications and get some information about that third bullet. The first bullet on the USM work plan goes back to Representative Millet's question earlier. So the topic in our work plan that you voted on and prioritized was investigating the training, resources, infrastructure, or other supports schools need to provide special education services for 3 to 5-year-old students. And so this really comes back to, it points in my mind to, the PCG report, coordination with MDOE, because they're doing a lot of this work, boots on the ground. But also really, it feels like a survey where we would be talking to some practitioners and trying to get a sense of what are their needs, what are the resources, what's the expertise, all those kind of things. Some of that is following up on a report we did last year, and it's going in a slightly different direction, specifically with taking over services. We know that this also has a little bit of overlap or relationship to LD 135. And so LD 135 was specifically about centralized billing. And the way I see this working, and again, this process is, we're still trying to figure this out. The department has been tasked with, in LD 135, we do work, the resources to do the bigger research question about understanding the resources that are needed. The resources for that are built into our work plan with you. We haven't identified, I don't believe there was a fiscal note attached to LD 135. So there are not resources we can point to where we could literally be contracted to the department to go do that work for them. However, we will be looking, just by happenstance, I don't know, we're looking at special education as one of the components we're reviewing for the commissioner under our EPS contract. So the I guess, messy next step is to figure out what piece of the work that the department has been charged to do under LD 135 could be put in our work plan that's, because it's related to EPS special education funding, which billing certainly feels like it's a good fit. And therefore we could do some of that work that the department would like some help with by using the resources that are in another existing contract. So it's a little bit, I gotta say, it's a little bit messy when you guys drop us in a bill. We love it. We love to do this work. We want to be relevant, but it's a little hard because we can't work for the department for free. And if there's not a fiscal note, it gets a little messy. So we think we're going to make this work because we already have to look at special education, but the department really needs to isolate what needs to be done for LD 135 and then identify, are there pieces of it that are appropriate for us to do within our existing contract for the EPS component review. That was a long-winded answer, but we know there's some messiness here, and we're confident it's all going to work out in the end. But I could see that potentially there might be a little piece of it that we try to tack on to this work plan, specifically the piece in LD 135 that's about investigating what other states are doing. That also seems really, really relevant to our sort of background general review of understanding training, resources, infrastructure, and other supports. So that's a piece we might be able to take on partly for this contract. And then there might be other pieces that are more related to EPS that would be appropriate for that contract. But ultimately, the department's on the hook for that. It's not, we're not in charge of LD 135, so it's moving parts. That's probably a great place to stop for questions because that was big.
Well, I think it is, but because as we continue to talk, I'm kind of losing my questions in my head here. So, because other questions are coming forward. But in any case, so today's already the 21st, and you would like these questions sent to Representative McRae by the 1st of August. So essentially, we have about 10 days in order to get those questions moved forward. And I have no problem with people sending questions directly to him. I would appreciate, though, if you would CC the rest of the committee, or at least Representative Brennan and myself, just so we're kind of, just keeping ourselves posted in terms of what's going asked. And I think that the survey relative to school principals and so forth is a great approach. And do you know if the department itself is doing one? My concern is the staff as well. I mean, I know that the principals have, carried a huge burden, but I know that classroom teachers have as well. So I'm just, are you aware of anything that anyone is doing relative to seeking that information?
Well, definitely that's a great reason why we want to bring this back to the MEPRI steering committee, because even if not the department, we don't know what if the MEA is on the steering committee, they might doing some data collection. The NSMA is on the steering committee, they might have some stuff that's in the works. So that's where the beauty of the MEPRI steering committee, to make sure that we can kind of hash this out and look at the big picture. I do know the department has some data collection in the works, but I don't remember with any specificity exactly what they're doing.
Thank you. Hillary has a hand up for a question. Or?
Yes, I just wanted to offer for committee members and for both the chairs and Representative McRae, to the extent I can be helpful. I am going to be out of the office next week, but I can certainly help compile on Monday, or even on Sunday, August 1st, I can sort of help compile some of this information. If anyone sends me emails, or if you want to send me an email of all the topics you've received, I can compile that into something for the full committee if that would be helpful. Just let me know.
Thanks. So as folks send questions and they CC Representative Brennan and myself, then I'll make sure that I compile those for you, Hillary. All right.
And you'll just forward them on, and I can do the compiling if that's
yeah. Thank you.
And I'll say that we didn't want to come here without a process. We wanted to come in with a proposed process, but there's nothing magic to this. This is we haven't had a chance for a pre-meeting where we're trying to build this as we're flying it and be able to start work on this because the time is clicking. So and I want to reiterate, we already have thoughts about what these topics will entail. We're not starting from scratch. These proposals came from the MEPRI steering committee. We've had some input along the way. What we have not had is the opportunity to come before you and actually talk through each topic. So this is what we're proposing is an after the fact. Now that you know what the topics are because of the ratings as they've happened, this is another opportunity to get a little more specific with your hopes and dreams about what you're hoping we'll learn. If we don't hear from you, we've got plenty of thoughts and ideas about what we'll do, and we're used to doing that and coming up with the specific research methods ourselves. But we do want to make sure that you have an opportunity for input, and also that if there's something that you really need by January, that we know that now, because what we've learned in the past is we can't wait till January on a report that we're planning for April to know that you need it now. So the more we can try to prognosticate ahead of time, that's the goal of this step in this process. I see more hands up.
Yeah, I think Hillary might have a follow-up, as does Representative Dodge.
Nope, just forgot to take it down. Sorry about that.
Okay. Representative Dodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So who best or who better than our two committee chairs to look at the list of bills, perhaps our analysts as well, about the bills that are going to be coming before us that are carried over for next session and how they relate to the 6 possible topics. How might that work, discussion, asking questions happen in the next 7.5 to 8 days?
Well, and again, so this August 1st is not a fixed deadline. I'm just trying to have this process be time limited, because if you come in November with a great idea, it's too late. So we're going to be reconvening the MEPRI steering committee, and I'm trying to give a process. You have a representative, it's Representative McRae. I'm trying to give him something to work with. If you have a great idea on August 5th, that's great. It's not that time limited. Again, we're trying to structure something here to resurrect a contract that needs to get underway like tomorrow. And I will say that's, thank you for thinking of that. We've been trying to keep track of the bills that are carried over. So I had that on my plate to do that, but oh my gosh, yeah, it would be lovely if the analyst could support that. And or we could talk about it together. I can make some of that judgment myself of, hey, this is related to this topic, but to make
sometimes I would say too, sometimes what we need is just general time frame, that certain topics of these 6, which of these do you need to hear from us reported out earlier rather than later? And then the specific scheduling, we could work with the co-chairs on that. So if you look across these, can you anticipate there might be some legislative action on any of these topics early? Then we would want to get you a report in February or March.
And we have our own thoughts on that. We're not starting from ground zero. We already are going to come to the co-chairs with a proposal for them to look at. We're not going to make them start from scratch. Certainly this one about investigating the topics, training resources, we know that one's going to have policy action and with report backs coming to you in January. So our plan is that we'll try to synthesize all this information, bring a proposal to the co-chairs, and then give them final say. So
Hillary, did you have another question?
So what I wanted to sort of interject and mention is that I certainly will have a carryover list, and we can send that out. The other thing we're of course doing, as I mentioned earlier, is we are working on putting together that list of report backs coming from both the Department of Education as well as some of the higher education institutions. And the difficulty in the puzzle of scheduling is always about how do you bring all of these parts together so that the topics come together at the right time. Of course, some of the unknown is, there will be new bills next session. We don't know what they will be. We don't know what they will be probably until December, January, or February. But that is work that we are doing here in my office, and we'll try to expedite that as much as we can and make sure that Amy and Janet, you get that as well, so that you can also see when those deadlines are for those other report backs coming from some of those other entities. And for example, on LD 135 and LD 255 and 386, which are those 3 companion CDS bills, what that report back due date is, to the extent that will help the chairs and help me as I try to help put that schedule together for the winter. Some of that may not be known now, but to the extent we can predict, that'll all be included, and I can include these MEPRI topics in that list when I get that out to everyone.
And again, what we're hoping is that there would be a little bit of back and forth, so that if you were to say this report is critical, and we say the earliest possible date we could get you this report because of XYZ methods we've determined is February, that might be something where you realize that's a constraint. And so I see it being a little bit of back and forth.
So in terms of carryover, going back to that topic, there's not a lot of bills. I think I want to say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 12 or 13, but I don't even know that it's that high, to be very honest with you. So, that's something I'm sure we could take a look at. I know I could next week and see if there's related questions to the topics. But I think the biggest thing would be making sure that you folks share the topics that you have outlined so people can review those and create some questions based on that, okay? Because I think that's specifically what you're ultimately looking for right now.
Right.
Representative Millett.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to try again, because I may not have been very lucid in my explanation of what I was hoping we could have to help with this process. I agree that keeping in mind when the report backs are going to be coming from the various entities, if they are related to any of these topics, that should be really synced up. And I am confident that Hillary and Sam and our good co-chairs can figure out what that timeline, what those timelines could be, in conjunction with MEPRI and understanding how long they anticipate the analyses to take. And that's what I was asking for, was when I'm hoping we're going to get a list of these topics that we're expected to communicate to Representative McCray, any additional thoughts or questions to inform the process, along with an estimated amount of time that MEPRI is going to be required to invest in producing these analyses to better inform when it's likely we could get those report backs. Thanks.
So it's shaping my understanding. So what I'm seeing that would be beneficial, I think it would have to be a draft. So because what I'm envisioning, and Janet and I haven't had endless time to talk about this, but I think we're on the same page, is once we get that feedback, it may necessitate changes in what we thought we were going to do. And so we didn't want to predetermine deadlines until you'd given us that feedback, but I certainly understand, I think, the conundrum of like chicken and egg, right? So certainly I think we can get you these high level topics with a sense of what we were thinking for methods and the earliest we could have them available, knowing that we can't do them all at the earliest available date because some have to be later. But that I can understand why that would be helpful, and that's something we could get to you by probably Friday or Monday. I think I better understand what you're looking for now. With the understanding that because we haven't already had this conversation, we might learn things from your feedback that would pivot. And that would be the chair's final decision to say XYZ is the higher priority. We want you to do this instead of that. That was our vision.
Thank you.
Maybe we can stop sharing the screen and then just.
Well, there's one left, and we saved the best for last. Goodness gracious. So on my work plan, I get to look at examining school district curriculum and instruction and community partnerships to support racial equity, which we were really, really excited about when this was initially proposed. And this has now become such a flashpoint in the national conversation that I'm nervous about this. And I'm looking for very clear direction on what would be helpful. So this topic came loud and clear from the MEPRI steering committee as something that our schools are struggling with. What's best practice, what's helpful. This is absolutely not from the intent of the MEPRI steering committee, unless you guys change this, which I'm sure you're not. This is not about dictating curriculum. The department, when they saw this in the work plan, was pretty nervous. Nobody's talking about curriculum. What this is, the word curriculum, I wish wasn't in there, but it's too late because it's in the work plan. But what it was intended to be about, and again, I really do think this one, maybe more than the others, could get shaped by these next steps in our process, is trying to figure out at this day and time in our society where schools are really struggling with how to handle the conversations about racial equity, what resources can we give them, and or what are the policy questions that we need to shine a light on. So that was the intent of this study. And I'm looking for some very clear direction on exactly what questions you want me to ask. And so this maybe more than others might be one where, to frame it in a positive light, what would be helpful to policymakers at this time when we know these are issues that the schools are struggling with. I don't want to, again, I'm not here for discussion right now, but this is our conundrum. And we want to put together something that is helpful and not something that is controversial. And so we're confident we can toe that line, but we want to have your input to make sure we're getting you something that'll be helpful to you.
So
now I'll stop sharing.
So you're asking us for potential questions that you would like to ask relative to that area.
How about this? When I put together this list in the next few days, I'll try to put some better thought into what would be helpful to us. This one in particular, I'm not exactly sure what I'm asking, but I'll put some more thought into it. What I know is policymakers must have questions. I want to generate a report that would help you inform whatever actions you want to take. And the kind of questions you have might be very different from the kind of questions that came out of the steering committee from practitioners. They're looking for something a little different than what policymakers might want. So I think that, so I'll give you maybe a prompt or something. I don't know. Janet and I will figure something out magical in the next couple of days.
Please do, because right now I'm sitting there, you did save the best for last, obviously.
I would gather that you could sense the circumstance and how, it's an important topic. I'm not trying to but it's taken on a whole new level of meaning, and we want to make sure that what we're doing is useful.
Okay. Thank you.
With that, we have some next steps. So Janet and I will work together, and we'll get you, we'll get you the PDF of these slides, so you have that. But we'll also try to put together a document that's a little bit more, I don't know, give you something to go on for what we're looking for. And then if you're able to give that feedback to Representative McRae by August 1st, that would be ideal. But what we can't do again is come up with a plan, finalize the plan, and then change our minds. So it's going to be a little bit of a floating deadline as we figure this out, and the co-chairs will be communicating with them. So it's not going to happen in a vacuum.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You've had a crazy session, and it's been.
We all have. Put it this way: we've all done our best, and I think we've done a lot of great things. So if I could pat you all on the back, I would. And that question, are you folks working? Is your committee going to be working remotely, or do you always work remotely? I mean, I know there's, Representative McRae in particular doesn't live in downtown Portland, so or Augusta. So how are you folks working? Is you going to continue to work this?
I think we will. Yeah. I mean, we haven't specifically asked that question, but I imagine, especially for this summer, it's much easier. So okay. I imagine we will be doing remote. Yes.
Thank you.
And hopefully we could do reports in the spring in person in Augusta if you're back, everybody's back.
Well, I'm hoping we are all back to Augusta here. I mean, it was nice to be in Augusta for the few times we were, and actually I thought we might even be there today, but not that I'm happy we aren't, but so we don't know going in oftentimes.
Sure, right, yeah.
So.
Well,
any other questions? I'm sorry?
I just said thank you.
Any other questions? Oh. All right, well, seeing none, then again, thank you folks very much. We appreciate your presentation today. Look forward to getting the follow-up in terms of the topics and so forth. And we will do our best to get you relative questions by August 1st.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you all. Have a good day. And Hillary, thank you for being the, taking care of us in terms of running the meeting as well. So I'm going to tell Sam, I'll say, Sam, we flopped without you. So just, I got to give him a feel good.
Well, Sam certainly helped me. But Sam certainly helped me pull those materials together, and we'll continue pulling some other things together to help the committee. And of course, as always, just don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions, or if you get any questions from someone else that you want to forward to. We're always trying, happy to help if we can. And if not, we'll try to find the person who can help you.
Well, I was going to say, don't let any of our requests prevent you from enjoying some well-deserved time away. So both of you, all right? So thank you all very much, and we'll see you folks soon. Take care.
Representative Brennan, do you want to add anything, or?
No, I was just going to say, Senator Rapid and I will talk over the next several weeks, and I think we would be looking to for a meeting sometime in September, following up on these topics, as well as looking. I'm very interested in the report backs and the task forces, possibly having an update from DOE about school opening and what that looks like. And my guess is that the presiding officers would be more likely to approve a meeting of our committee if we meet by Zoom as opposed to in person, because in person means that there's money that's going to be spent, whereas if we do it by Zoom, it has no impact on the legislative budget. So keeping that in mind, as much as we might like to meet in person, we may still be using the Zoom option just because the financial impact is limited and we might get approval from providing officers more quickly. So, and I just wanted to thank everybody for all the work that was done this past session. It's amazing to me that we're sitting here having passed a budget, passed bills, and done all the work that we've done up to this point. And hopefully in the fall, we can set the table for having a very productive session starting in January. And I just asked Representative Stearns if he had anything that he wanted to add. You're on mute. You're on mute, Paul.
I think he's saying he knows he's on mute and he's all good.
You can't unmute, yeah.
He's on mute and he wants to stay that way?
I think I guess is he's unable to unmute. But.
Okay. And just if anybody cares, Representative Lyman and I Monday night stayed in the parking lot till about 9:30, and we solved all the educational problems confronting the state of Maine. So we will unveil that plan for you in January.
Well, if you tape that conversation, you can forward it to all of us, including MEPRI folks. Yeah, problem solved. But it is nice to have that face-to-face.
Congratulations on that, because I've been trying for years with Representative Brennan, don't get very far. Yeah. So congratulations on your part.
All right. Well, again, thank you all.